How to stop seeking perfection. I am one of the biggest perfectionists, or I used to be at least, um, with like art, with my food, with the clothes I wore, with just like the way I did homework, the way that I lived my life. Everything had to be just like perfect, organized, exactly how I expected it to be, right? And perfectionism has kind of like nipped at my how does the saying go? Anyway, it has chased me. It has chased me for a lot of my life, and these are the frameworks and the behaviors that I have realized have worked for me to kind of mitigate the effects of perfectionism and to kind of overcome and reframe this idea of seeking perfection and always needing to be absolutely optimized and perfect and mistake free and flawless, right? This is how I have kind of alleviated this vice. The first principle is you have to understand what perfection is. And at least the way I define it is now it is the perpetuation of pain and a projection of your lack of progress, right? So that sounds very negative. It sounds very dark, but I think that's necessary. When you're operationalizing terms for yourself, you need to, especially if it's something that you want, it's a bad habit or something you want to break, you want to stop doing, you need to create a environment and a understanding of the thing that is rather negative so that you don't want to associate with it anymore, right? And so I have created a very negative operation of perfection, right? Operationalized definition of perfection. It's the perpetuation of pain and the projection of your lack of progress. And so when you hear that, whenever I repeat that to myself, I really don't want to be a perfectionist. You know, if that's what perfectionism is, then do you really want to be that? And I always ask myself that every time I'm trying to be perfect. I'm trying to make sure everything is going and appears to be the way I expect it to be. I just use that frame, right? That I am just putting myself willingly into unnecessary pain, and I'm just projecting the fact that I'm not making progress. And this, as a result of having that definition, it motivates me to actually go make progress by making mistakes and not being perfect, right? You could reframe perfection as kind of a motivator for imperfection, right? Imperfection will like in some ways lead to perfection. I mean, that shouldn't be the goal, but you first start with like a really ugly pot. Like if we're talking about like pottery, you start with a really ugly pot, but then like a pile of clay, and then you mold it together, right? Over time, you mold it together, and then eventually you have this gorgeous clay pot. But at the beginning, it was just a pile of clay, a pile of shit, right? You didn't. It wasn't anything. It wasn't anything meaningful. But you shape and you put things together. It was imperfect, but then you turned it into something that's nearly perfect, nearly flawless, right? And so I think that's the key, right? You need to reframe things. You need to really understand that your life isn't going to be perfect and never will be perfect and it never was meant to be perfect. And that's okay. That's the point. That's the experience that everyone has. Everyone starts with the pile of clay, and then we all kind of figure out a way to design the pot, you know? And there's actually the study of, speaking of pots, there's the study where I think it was for like a pottery class. It might have been photography actually. I've heard multiple versions of the same analogy, but let's talk about pottery since I was talking about pots. One group of students was told to make the single best pot out of the entire year, right? They were instructed to make this single best pot, like just one single pot, and present that at the end of the class. And then another group was told they can make as many pots as they want. They can use as much clay. They can go through as many iterations as they want, and then they present the final product. And guess what? The group that made one single pot had worse outcomes, like the pots were worse than the group that made a bunch of pots. And so the point of this is that perfectionism almost always leads to mediocrity. in the face of repetition. So like the person that is putting in the reps and is willing to make mistakes and willing to fuck up and not be perfect is always going to have better outcomes. The output that they get is always going to be better because they're learning and they're iterating upon their mistakes. And so like if you think about this in terms of pottery, the person that is making only one pot, they only have one shot at this. They have to like use this one piece of clay and just like work it around. Like they don't get to make multiple pots. But the people that are making a ton of pots, they learn the nuance. They learn the skill. They figure out what they did wrong on that pot that they can improve on this pot. And so the outcome of stacking these mistakes is a better pot. It's an extraordinary, an exceptional pot, right? A nearly flawless pot. Because it's just like you can think of the clay almost embodying the evidence of your mistakes. It's like it represents all the mistakes and the shortcomings that you've had to learn as a result of making all these pots. But the person only makes one pot that's relying on perfectionism and relying on this one shot. They're not gonna make a pot that's amazing because they're not learning anything. They're not learning the skill of making the pot, you know? And so reframe perfectionism, realize that you have to make something bad and then figure out how to make it less bad to make something good. That is the way I kind of see things, Whenever I suck at something, I am loud about it. I'm very aware of it. I'm telling people, yeah, I'm terrible at this. I suck. But then you get better. You learn the skill. You do the thing, and the bad thing gets less bad. And guess what? If you accumulate this less bad things, less bad pots, you get better and better at making pots, and eventually you have a good pot, right, that you can present. So the behaviors are just really about frameworks and mindsets that you can adopt to kind of stop seeking perfectionism and just reframing it as this kind of unnecessary pain and suffering in your life. Like, you don't need to actually put yourself through this pain. Like, just be willing to fuck up and learn from it, because the outcome is going to be greater than if you were trying to be perfect all the time. Goodbye.